Since spooky season is starting off, I thought I would begin this time of the year by talking about one of my most favorite horror novels, Dracula, and the 1922 German silent film Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror. Now, why talk about those? Well, if you've read the book and you have seen that silent film, you know that Nosferatu is a plagiarism of Dracula. One features Count Dracula, who has become sort of the baseline for all vampire fiction, and the other features Count Orlok, which in some ways is very similar to Dracula. However, I wanted to do a video to discuss their differences, because despite Nosferatu being a blatant trademark infringement of Dracula, there are some key differences between their antagonists. Count Dracula and Count Orlok are very different characters, and I want to break it down. So sit back, relax, and welcome to Studio Jake. Hi everyone, my name is Jacob Berry. Welcome to the StudioJake vidcast, where I talk about all things pop culture. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and if you're watching on YouTube, ring that little bell to get notifications when I post a new vidcast, and consider becoming a channel member. If you want to support me in the work that I do, click on the link to my new website. It's in the description of this video. It's my Substack where you can subscribe at different tiers that unlock different perks, and I've got way more pop culture articles over there. So thank you in advance to everyone who checks it out and subscribes. And by the way, I'm not going to be talking about Halloween themed stuff from September to October. I will just be sort of dropping it in here and there. But if you would like me to talk about a specific horror character for Halloween, please let me know in the comment section below. So Dracula came out at the tail end of the Victorian era in 1897. It was written by Bram Stoker, an ardent Catholic man who produced many other works, but Dracula is his most famous. It featured, of course, Jonathan Harker as the protagonist and Abraham Van Helsing, who has become a very popular character in stories regarding Dracula. Some just forget about Harker and his fiancée Mina altogether in their stories. They just focus on Van Helsing because he's an occult expert, an expert in the undead, and ultimately he is the one who defeats Dracula in the novel. Now, Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror, featured an actor named Max Schreck portraying Count Orlok, and it was one of the first adaptations of Dracula before it became in public domain. As a result, Stoker's family sued to have the film stopped, and eventually cinemas that had reels of the film destroyed the reels because they didn't want to be caught up in the lawsuit. As a result of this, the film was considered lost for some time before it was rediscovered, and it also has slipped into the public domain, so you can even find it here on YouTube. I highly recommend Midnight's Edge cut of the film. It's on a special YouTube channel that they have, so you can head over there and check that out. By all accounts, Nosferatu, and I'm talking specifically about the original Nosferatu, yes, the remake does have some of those themes as well, but specifically the silent film version is almost a blatant copy of Dracula. Some events were sped up, some characters were combined, but it was almost identical to the story. The novel, introduces us to Count Dracula, and Nosferatu introduces us to Count Orlok. And despite them being very similar, at least plot structure-wise, I have noticed that between Count Dracula and Count Orlok, there are some key differences between the two characters, and I wanted to highlight them in this video. And by the way, this is a very layman's term look at the characters, but I just wanted to break it down for all of you after me reading the novel several times, and even the found taken out chapter called Dracula's Guest, and having seen Nosferatu 3 times, and I've also seen the remake, which is phenomenal, but it is not for kids, just so you know. So to start with, one of the key differences between Dracula and Orlok is basically their personality. Dracula is this very charismatic figure. He is handsome and he is well groomed. He dresses well, and though he doesn't eat or drink, he lures people in with that charisma. He dazzles them, he tempts them. He is sort of a sinfluencer, if you will. Thank you, Chris and Jack, for that joke. But anyway, I still think that it is a key thing about Dracula is that he chooses to lure people in, not with the threat of power or curses, but if you read the novel, and even movie adaptations have captured this as well, Dracula is a very smooth talker. He is very seductive in the way he words things. He's very learned because he's been alive for, thousands of years. So he has a wealth of knowledge. That is how he captures people. And in fact, Jonathan Harker, the protagonist of Dracula, when he first arrives in Transylvania, he's almost allured by Dracula and his brides. In fact, the brides try to tempt Harker at one point. Dracula himself interrupts this because he wants to use Harker's blood to turn young again. Because at the beginning of the novel, he looks kind of aged, but he's still handsome. His castle is filled with cobwebs and it's dusty, but it doesn't look bad. It's not necessarily run down. And even when Dracula gets to London, when he's turned young again because he's been preying on all these young people in the city, he still is luring people in with his seemingly wealthy lifestyle and his charisma, almost like a cult leader. He pulls you into that and makes you feel comfortable with him. In fact, Dracula is not allowed to enter a building unless he is invited into it. That's a key thing about it. And so he tempts you by being sort of charismatic. Now, he does show bouts of power, such as turning into a bat, a wolf, and even drawing insects and swarms of rats to him, but he rarely does this in the novel. It's more like he just wants to show how powerful he is to people, but he prefers definitely a more seductive and alluring way to bring people into his trap. Count Orlok, on the other hand, is completely different than this. In fact, when the protagonist of the film, Thomas Hutter, arrives at Count Orlok's castle, also in Transylvania, Count Orlok kind of chastises him. And also, he's very monstrous looking. Instead of having the vampire teeth being his fangs, they're his front teeth. He's got elf-like sharp ears. He's balding. His hands in particular are very creepy. They kind of look claw-like. They're elongated and have sharp nails. And yes, I know a lot of media representations of Dracula. He also has long nails, but they're still well groomed. Count Orlok is not well groomed at all. He dresses very dilapidated, and his castle also shows this. It's almost crumbling, and Hutter makes note of this. Perhaps this is why he wants to move to the German cities where Hutter works as a real estate agent, like Harker works as a real estate agent in London. And also, Count Orlok is a lot more brazen in his attempts to try to suck the blood of Hutter and later Hutter's own loved one. He's not very alluring. He's not very charismatic. He's very pushy. So what brings people in to Orlok's web? In my opinion, the remake does this a little bit better. It's his show of power. Orlok is not adverse to showcasing his power, his inhuman strength, his ability to summon rats, also morph. Also, he's not bound by the same rules as Dracula. He can come and go as he pleases anywhere. That's what pulls you into him, is a show of might, terrifies you. His use of sort of dated and dead languages, and that is what intimidates you. He wants to intimidate you with his power and make you see it. And that is a very interesting diversion from Dracula, like I said, who's very charismatic and alluring. Count Orlok is not like that. He's not charming. He is learned like Dracula, but it is not the same. The second key difference is how they decide to wreak havoc. So, reading Dracula, you see Count Dracula is not prone to bouts of great strength and determination and destruction like a lot of other versions of him have been portrayed in media. In fact, I'm a big Marvel Comics fan. Dracula appears as a villain against the Avengers and even the X-Men, and he is very destructive in his nature. It's kind of funny how that is because he's not like that in the novel at all. And like I said, yes, he's not unopposed to showing off his power. He does this at several moments. But when he gets to London, he doesn't just announce his arrival. People are suspicious that something's up because of what he does to the crewmen of the Demeter. the ship that brings him and his brides into London. But Dracula and his brides are way more subtle in their approach. He prefers to go after one person at a time as opposed to a great many people at once. He gets a target and he hones in on it and he focuses on that. And he prefers to use London and even England as more of a hunting ground. So he picks his prey, he stalks it, maybe even is alluring toward that particular person, whether it be a man or a woman, and brings them into his web before he eventually either eats them, drains all their blood so they die, or they turn into a vampire. And that is something very interesting about Dracula, is he's very particular with who he wants to turn into a vampire. He doesn't just want to pick every single citizen of London and turn them into an army of vampires. Now, I know, again, media representations have done this to Dracula, but no, he prefers a very selective group of people to be his new vampires. Now, his brides, they may see things differently. They might go after any handsome man that comes their way or beautiful woman that comes their way. But Dracula is very, very particular with who he haunts and who he stalks. He's very selective in that manner. Count Orlok arrives in Germany with guns ablazing, that poor coastal town. Now, unlike Dracula, Count Orlok is not interested in creating new vampires at all. He wants that poor German town all to himself. He wants to feed on them. And like I said, he's not bound by the same rules as Dracula. His only weakness appears to be sunlight. And I have heard that in some versions of the script and even maybe some cuts of the film, they've also said silver and a stake through the heart, which are some of Dracula's weaknesses, might be also a weakness of Count Orlok. But by all accounts, it seems to me that sunlight is his main weakness. And he brings in plague rats, and this causes a panic in the city. Now, they eventually blame Hutter, the protagonist of Nosferatu. They blame his boss because his boss has been dabbling in the occult, and that is actually how he connected with Count Orlok and helped him get a home in Germany away from Transylvania. And Count Orlok unleashes these plague rats, which is what is the Nosferatu. It's an ancient curse that befalls the German town, and the only way to stop the curse is to kill Count Orlok. And Count Orlok, he comes in with an army. Now, he doesn't necessarily reveal himself, but unlike Dracula, who's very selective in who he haunts, who he targets, who he hunts, Count Orlok just goes into random windows and doors, and because he doesn't have to be invited, he just targets whoever he thinks is weak enough not to be a challenge to him, and he goes after them. It is way more about the brute force than the subtlety that we see in Dracula. I find that very interesting, and this is true of most interpretations of Nosferatu. What I mean by that is there have been remakes besides the most recent one. There have been some other remakes where Count Orlok is a little bit more subtle and selective in his targeting, but I'm talking specifically about the silent film. He comes in with his army of rats, he puts a plague upon the whole town, and he is going to feast, and nothing is going to stop him from feasting on this poor town, and he might even kill the entire town and then move on to the next one. The third and final difference between the two, I think, really encapsulate just how different they are, and that is how they are defeated and how they are handled. Now, like I said at the outset, Bram Stoker was a Christian, he was Catholic, he was a very ardent Catholic. He really supported the ideals of Christianity, and that includes in how he tells the story of Dracula. If you look at Dracula's weaknesses, silver representing the silver coins that Judas was paid to betray Jesus, a stake through the heart, which is wood representing the wood that Christ was crucified on, fire representing the fire of God, holy water representing baptism, garlic, a common thing used to ward off pests because the smell would keep them away, and of course, beheading, separating the mind from the body. All of these things are tied in some way to Bram Stoker's faith. That is not to say that he didn't use some form of occultism in some of the representation, but that's mainly from Dracula's side. So what ends up happening is Jonathan Harker's fiance, Mina, she is targeted by Dracula to become a vampire. He forces her to drink his blood, which is how you become a vampire. So he doesn't just drain your blood or bite you and you become a vampire like a lot of media interpretations do. The person dies if they refuse to drink his blood. But if you do drink his blood, that's how you become a vampire. And because it was a forced drinking, Mina is able to use her faith to sort of resist Dracula's pull into being an undead. And as we all know, Abraham Van Helsing, he does things to slow it down. He baptizes her in holy water. He draws salt circles around her to prevent her from moving and trying to become a temptress like a lot of Dracula's other brides. All that to say, it is very Christian in its way. Christianity, the faith of Christ, will overcome what is happening to the Harkers and London at large. It is a battle of faith versus fear, and something that has really influenced me in my writings, particularly my Christian writings, including Cacophony and Blessed Child. You can see that theme of faith versus fear, how Dracula invokes that fear in people, and how eventually his brides, the temptresses, they are taken by being beheaded as Dracula is defeated by Abraham Van Helsing and is ultimately defeated. It is an impressive display of their faith, of their heart, and I really applaud Stoker for bringing that and being so bold in it. Now, a lot of people have interpreted it different ways. Some people have said that Dracula is a representation of the Antichrist and that people becoming vampires is a representation of the mark of the beast. I disagree. I don't think there's any end times or eschatology in the Dracula novel. That's just my own thoughts on it, having read it several times. I think it's more about the infiltration of the occult, how it slowly eats away. The only way to defeat it is with the truth of the gospel. That is my sort of insight into it. Count Orlok, on the other hand, not like that at all. Count Orlok cannot be defeated by modern morals. Now, Christianity isn't really broached in Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror. It is in the remake when Hutter is able to escape from Count Orlok's castle. He is taken in not by Catholics, but by German Orthodox nuns and prayed over and healed as a result of this, although they say his healing isn't complete when he flees back to his original hometown. That is a huge difference in this, is that while Dracula definitely hones in on Bram Stoker's faith, and yes, a lot of vampire stories, including adaptations of Dracula, have sort of thrown this off. They've ignored the Catholic part of this. Hollywood likes to do this. They don't really like people of faith, even when a person of faith like Bram Stoker gives them something that they can adapt into a film that or TV show that makes millions of dollars. They want to ignore that aspect of his life. It happens. Nosferatu, and I'm talking about the silent film, despite being a blatant rip-off of Dracula, ignores that entirely and instead focuses on the occult beating the occult. In fact, I can't remember if it was the screenwriter or the director, but one of the people involved in the making of Nosferatu was an occultist and would even write articles about being in the occult. And I imagine that is what lured the story of Dracula to them, how faith overcame fear, how the gospel overcame the occult, but they wanted to do something more modern. Because don't forget, we have entered the modern era, and it seems like the old ways are being forgotten. Technology is replacing everything. Even back then, in 1922, the Industrial Revolution had impacted the world tremendously, not to mention World War I. World War II is gearing up. So yeah, a German film that looks back and says, hey, maybe the old ways were a little bit better. But instead of turning to Christianity, they turn to the occult. And ultimately, Orlok is defeated not because of courage or faith. In fact, he's defeated by one person, the sacrifice of Hutter's wife, Ellen. Now, in the remake, she's his fiancée, although they act very inappropriately for just being engaged. But Ellen is very much a woman that Count Orlok longs for. He desires her. He wants her to be part of his feast. In his mind, it's not about making new brides or even new soldiers. In his mind, it is all about the feast and how good they taste. And so she lures him to her room, and Hutter's friends know that he won't go for this, so they kind of lead him away. And she lures Count Orlok. She openly welcomes him and then just keeps him occupied with draining her blood. The sun rises and he turns to dust, and the curse, the Nosferatu, ends. The plague rats all scurry away to parts unknown, and they are not seen again. So it's not about faith conquering fear, it's about a different fear conquering fear. It is kind of a reverse of that, a flip on that. So there you have it. It's very, very different. Count Dracula turns to Christianity and the truth of the gospel, whereas Nosferatu turns to the old ways, old superstitions that don't really matter in a modern context. But there is a greater evil that is born from the old ways, and the new ways, the technology can't stop it. Ultimately, I side with Dracula because I am a Christian. I believe that the gospel is the ultimate truth, and I believe that my God is greater and that it can overcome even the darkest vampire. So yeah, those are my three key differences between the stories. Dracula and Orlok are very different characters. Dracula is charismatic and alluring. Count Orlok is powerful and mighty. Number two is they are very different in their strategic approach. Dracula is more subtle. He is more on the hunt. Count Orlok does a mighty show of force. And three, how are they defeated? Dracula is defeated by the gospel, the truth overcoming lies, and Nosferatu is ended, thus ending Count Orlok by using his own occultism against him. I hope you read Dracula. I hope that you watch Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror. Like I said, there are many cuts of it here on YouTube, maybe even here on Rumble. I'm not sure, but it is in the public domain. It's very easy to find. So I highly recommend that you check that out, especially as we go into spooky season. If you want my recommendation for the best representation of Dracula, nothing beats the Bela Lugosi Dracula. It does depart from the novel and it does just kind of end, but it is pretty good. Bela Lugosi, in my humble opinion, is the best version of Dracula, even among other adaptations that I have seen. Once again, I want to remind you, spooky season is starting, and I'm not going to do a Halloween theme thing all the way through to Halloween, but I do want you to leave me a comment and tell me if there is a Halloween story or a character you would like me to examine, maybe even for Lore Universe, or a cartoon you would like me to look out for Comics, Cartoons, and Coffee. Whatever the case may be, I would love to hear your suggestions. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked that video, be sure to give it a like, share it out to all your friends, leave me a comment to what you think, and subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, ring that little bell to get notifications when I post a new vidcast, and consider becoming a channel member. If you want to support me in the work that I do, head on over to my website, studiojakemedia.substack.com. The link is in the description of the video. You can subscribe at different tiers that unlock different perks, including being able to pick out the topic for the website and here on the vidcast. So a great deal there. I really hope you check it out. Thank you in advance. At that same website, there is a conveniently titled Buy My Books section. You can purchase one or all four of my novels. I've got links all over the place, but they're all available on Amazon. Pick up one or all four, leave me a 5-star review. It really helps out small indie creators like myself. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time right here on Studio Jake, and welcome to the autumn.
'Cause I've been living life right like I